Hello. It is 3:30 Central Standard Time, so we are going to get started. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to PBS Wisconsin bi-monthly Educator Connection Live program, where we offer high-quality, relevant professional learning opportunities for educators in all learning environments. My name is Muna Algaithi, and I'm the Education Engagement Specialist with PBS, and I am honored to be facilitating this webinar today with our special guest, Sara Alvarado. As with any conversation where critical topics are being discussed, I'd like to set some community guidelines for us all to practice and abide by. During this time, we ask you to pay attention to any emotions and reactions that occur. As you pay attention, we invite you to practice empathy. One of my favorite ways of understanding empathy comes from an emotion scientist and researcher, Brene Brown, who said, "Empathy has no script. There is no right way or wrong way to do it. It's simply listening, holding space, withholding judgment, emotionally connecting, and communicating that incredibly healing message of you're not alone." Secondly, we ask that you center your own learning, and if you choose to speak about your personal experiences, which we invite you to do, please use I statements and avoid generalizing entire communities of people. Finally, I encourage you to be open to new ideas. Public media hero Mr. Rogers said, "There is no normal life that is free of pain. It's the very wrestling with our problems that can be the impetus for our growth." Courageous and difficult conversations where we recognize our own biases and shortcomings and strive to become better is where so much of the change we need for a more prosperous future comes from. And I believe that it's in that accountability and vulnerability that leads to growth and collective change. And so I encourage you, as you notice any reactions that occur, explore and interrogate those. Lastly, for any comments or connections or questions, please utilize the chat box during Sara's presentation, and I'll do my best to make sure that your question is heard. Alyssa, the director of PBS Wisconsin Education, is also here today, and she and I will both be moderating the chat box during Sara's presentation. So let's practice utilizing and embracing those community guidelines, and we'll test out the chat box for those of you who haven't added to it already. And I invite you, if you're comfortable, to respond to either of these questions. We'll just take a minute or so to do this. The first one being, what are some concerns you have around initiating messy conversations or challenging conversations? Or secondly, what brings you to this Educator Connection Live today? So feel free to utilize the chat box and respond to either of these questions if you feel comfortable. I see one response, and I believe this answers, what are some concerns? And she said, the work after the conversation, the reconciliation piece. Another participant says that she works for a virtual school and will be facilitating these conversations with parents who are helping their children learn virtually at home. Some are concerned that having these conversations with others who may not empathize with their feelings. How can we correct and inform students who may have misconceptions or ignorant beliefs? Many are attending because they provide professional development for teachers, and this is a discussion that comes up a lot in those conversations. Many of you are here to listen and learn in order to continue your growth as an educator. Welcome. One attendee would like to more effectively facilitate these conversations on a daily basis with her middle school students and colleagues. Another teaches world culture to K through 4 and needs to be comfortable with messy conversations. Another commented, "None of my students look like me." Another said that she trains adults in mental health first aid, and she's worried about racist or homophobic statements being made and not knowing how to handle that in a public setting. in a classroom. Well, welcome to you all. I really hope that some of the strategies discussed in today's Educator Connection Live will be beneficial for your own growth as educators, as well as for those who are offering professional development for other districts and whatnot. So before we begin, before I pass the mic to Sara, who we're all very excited to hear from, I must acknowledge that PBS Wisconsin believes that there is no place for racism in our society. We recognize that we have a responsibility to use our voice and privilege to act against racism and anti-Blackness. We have a responsibility to educate ourselves and our communities of the injustices that occur against Black and Brown students. We have a responsibility to acknowledge and face our own biases. We have a responsibility to keep this conversation, learning, and action moving forward, and we invite you to join us to share in on this responsibility. In our statement to the communities we serve, we emphasize that we will use education and stories to offer new perspectives, to connect communities, to promote civic dialogue in an effort to explore our most challenging issues. And one of the many ways we do so is by using our reach and resources to foster discussion and change. Thank you for being here today as we collectively work towards a just society where equity, inclusion, and culturally relevant pedagogy are truly manifested in all learning spaces. Now it's time to hear from the one and only Sara Alvarado. We are so excited for you to be with us today. Sara is a speaker, writer, and facilitator specializing in race relations, racial justice, and real estate. Sara works to help folks who identify as white build the skills necessary to have messy conversations about race, privilege, and identity in order to do and be better. Sara is a co-founder of Step Up Equity Matters, a Madison-based community organization committed to creating change around inequities in the workplace and community. She built her personal real estate business into a successful brokerage with her husband, Carlos, who now leads the company. Sara, thank you for being here today. Yay! We are so excited to learn from you. So I will stop sharing my screen and pass the mic to you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Did we transition that well, Muna?
Yes, smooth indeed.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you, PBS, for all of your awesomeness. So I'm excited to jump into this today. Oh, I'm going to do a couple of things real quick. I'm not going to be looking at the chat at all because I'm easily distracted. So that's why Moon is going to help out with that. I do have a casual presentation style. So as I'm going through my presentation, even the word presentation is a little formal for me. Feel free to either ask a question in the chat and Muna will be looking at them and then she might even stop me. Or I think you can actually just stop, or I think you can use your unmute to ask a question too. There will be time afterwards for questions. I'm gonna do a hard stop at 4:20. So there might be some times where I talk a little bit faster or skip a slide because it's already 3:40. As Muna mentioned, I do this work in lots of different arenas, mostly working with white women and in the real estate arena. And that means that a lot of my presentation material is from that perspective and from that as a white person and as a female. So I also want to acknowledge the fact that a lot of people here, I see 100 people, everyone is at a different point on their own journey, their racial justice journey. So some people are just coming in, some people have been doing this work for a really long time. And I want to acknowledge that some of my material is going to be accessible and some of it might not be. So I'm going to ask you to take care of yourself. And if at any point it's not working for you, you do you. And if it's challenging for you, I'm just going to ask you to stick with it because discomfort is really important in learning how to engage in discomfort in a way at your growth edge so that you can do and be better. Yeah. So this is me and my family and my cute little dog Pumbaa. So I identify as a white woman. I'm an extrovert. I'm a rebel rouser and a business owner. I have a multicultural family, cisgender, she, hers, and I was raised Jewish Catholic, and I'm spiritual. And I will not swear as much on this as I normally do. And if it slips, I'm sorry. I think identity is really important in terms of understanding it and really knowing who you are, because when you know who you are, then you're able to acknowledge similarities and differences. And I think it's really important to acknowledge differences because we all have different experiences. And as a white person, I grew up in a lot of whiteness. And so whiteness seems normal. It seems like the norm. And that's something that is really important work for white people to do to move through that. So yeah, there's my sweet little family. Here's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about what's getting in our way, how we talk about it, what are we talking about, understanding process, and then what's next. So what do we want? What I'm hearing is we want to do less harm. This was just from some of the things in the chat earlier. Learning, a lot of learning, like how to do recovery better, how to be more comfortable. It's really important to be clear about what you want. What's not working? So that's one of the questions that I'm going to ask you to write down for your own self in terms of what's working and what's not working. Because what's working, let's also focus on that. And what's not working is really what we're doing here today. This is what I hear a lot in terms of silence. So silence sends a really loud message. And yet, sometimes when we say things, we say the wrong things and we cause harm. So there's this balance of speaking out and listening and learning when to and how to have conversations. So if you have noticed in your work, in your life, that you have moments of silence or where you don't interrupt or disrupt when you see or hear racism, can you just think for a moment about what holds you back or what is holding you back? I'm actually going to open my chat for this, if I can find it. So if you could throw into the chat, what holds you back? Part of the thing is that we have control over the message we say. So silence actually sends a message and then you don't know what message you're sending. And people are receiving a message. Not saying the right thing, fear of offending people, saying the wrong thing, being a minority in the room, fear of destroying family relationships, coming on too strong, not knowing how to express myself in ways others understand or with understanding myself, being that person, stealing the power from others, fear of being attacked. Okay. So perfectionism holds us back, wanting to do the right thing, not wanting to hurt anyone. I don't want to get into trouble. I don't know the right words, fear of sounding stupid, fear of being wrong. I don't want to make it worse. These are the reasons that we freeze. And as long as we can start to acknowledge them, then we can actually do something about it. So just the fact that you can think about why you don't speak up is step one. And then being able to reject whatever notion it is or work through it so that you don't keep having that same thing happening over and over again. I'm going to take a moment and talk about white women, just because there are a lot of teachers that are white women. So white women are in this unique position of being the oppressed and the oppressor. And a lot of the messages that women receive growing up, and I'm doing a lot of generalizations, but this is based on real life, is that Don't say anything unless you know exactly what to say. You need to look good, be perfect. Kids are meant to be seen and not heard. There is this oppressive system that doesn't want us to speak out or rebel or be that person, if you will. So don't get in trouble. Like, be good, be good, be good, be good. And then it's in our heads that rocking the boat is bad. And so these are the belief systems that we are raised with. And I think a lot of times what's really important for white women to be completely honest with themselves about is the whiteness is oppressive. White culture is oppressive. And once we know that, and we can really start to see how oppressive whiteness is within these systems, it's hard to acknowledge the fact that you are within a group that is oppressive, knowing what it feels like to be oppressed. So it's easier to just hide from it or shrink because it is painful. And if you can feel that pain and access it, you're also a little bit closer to being able to reject it and be like, you know what? I'm done. I don't want to be a part of that because it's not helpful for the community. It's not helpful for my students. It's not helpful for me. So separating yourself from the personal and from how systems work is one of the ways that you can start to see it better and not take it personally. So when you hear people talking about white women being responsible for Trump in office, for example, are you taking that personal, or are you seeing how the system's working and this unique position of women being silenced and also needing to speak out? And this is where we get into discernment and critical thinking skills. So what happens when you want to do something? Like if you decide you want to learn how to sew, or if you decide that you want to go back to school, what you want to do, what do you do? Like, what's your first step? I'm seriously asking. Research. There's a lot of researchers. Yes. Make a plan. I'm a talker. I'm like an oversharer and I talk way too much. And I love to be in conversations. So I ask people, I'm like, hey, what, you went to school for this, whatever. Like, so there's lots of things. You can ask questions, you can do research, but when you decide that you want to do something, when you plan on going on a trip, you know how to get where you need to go. There's a lot of people that are asking right now, racism is so bad. I don't know what to do. What should I do? And that question right there is also this overwhelm that is on purpose to shut us down and to keep us quiet. We have critical thinking skills, and we can be in discernment about who we're talking to, how we're talking to them, and what's going to be helpful and what's not going to be helpful for our own learning. So as soon as we realize that this is our work as white people, we're in a much better position to be discerning our critical thinking skills. Like, we're grown ass people, like we can figure things out, we can Google. So when you hear from people like, quit asking what to do, there is no checklist. There is no checklist because everybody is different. Everybody has different spheres of influence. They have different personalities. Like, how you show up in racial justice is based on a lot of things that have to do with you personally, your inner stuff. So I am asking to use those critical thinking skills, like you're doing today and signing up for something like this, to then take it back to what you need to do and where you can go with it. And that's where we get into the messy conversations with ourselves. So the first thing that you have to do is have a conversation with yourself and never stop that conversation. So if I were super techie, I would be playing Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror song right now. Okay, but I'm not super techie. So it's easy to go into action outside of ourselves, and it feels better. And we're constantly looking for ways to feel better. And it does not feel good for me to acknowledge when I have a biased thought. It makes me feel like I'm a bad person. As long as I'm very clear that my behaviors can be racist, Doesn't mean I'm necessarily a racist person, although I do believe that we are all racist because we live in a racist system. But if that is really uncomfortable for you, I'm still a good person. And I sometimes have racist behaviors or thoughts, and it's my job to change those. So to have that constant conversation with yourself and to get honest with yourself, because you can be really good at having conversations with everyone else in the world, but if you can't get honest with yourself, it's all superficial. And none of this work is going to mean anything unless it comes from deep down. So in my opinion, there's two ways of doing racial justice work. One is out of desire and one is out of obligation. So if people feel like I should be doing this work because everybody around me is talking about it, that's obligation. Oh, I should read this book, or I mean, there's a ton of shoulds. And anytime it comes out of obligation, it's surface. So if you can find a time where you actually felt the pain of racism for somebody else or within a situation where you physically feel the impact, that's where the desire comes from. And that's where you want to find that in you when you're in these uncomfortable situations, because it's so easy to be like, okay, this is too hard. I screwed up. I'm done. I'm out. And let's just be really clear. A lot of white people do that, and they have the ability to do that because they can just go on living in their little white worlds and not be negatively impacted by racism. Okay, so I'm trying to read my screen here, sorry. When we are talking to other people, one of the first things is, what's the intention? And so this has a lot to do with who are you talking to, right? Like, it's so easy to be like, oh, I need to have more conversations about race because the more I do it, the more practice I have. But what is the intention of the conversation? So are you going into a conversation with your Uncle Frank because you want to learn something from him? Or is it because you want to debate with him? Do you want to convince him of something? Do you want to just know where he's coming from? Be clear about what your intention is. Sometimes it's to relate, or it's to, like, if you have a really good friend who's going through something hard, your intention might be to just sit with them in the darkness and hold their hand, and not try and fix it. Because a lot of times our natural reaction is to fix something. And that's not always helpful. So thinking about what your intention is when you're contemplating what kinds of conversations you're going to have. Who am I talking to? Muna, do you know how to go into that chat or that the options and turn off the bell for when people come in and come out? It's in the participants button.
Okay, I'll play around with that. Thank you.
Okay, so who am I talking to and what are the power dynamics? I think it's really important for teachers to talk to teachers. I think it's really important for conversations to happen within colleagues. How are we talking about this? What are we talking about? And is it an effective conversation, or is it just a time to vent? But if you want to have an effective conversation about how am I actually having these conversations with parents or with my students, that's very different than when you're talking to the district level, or when you're talking to a parent, or when you're talking to students, and when you're talking to students in the classroom versus on the playground. I mean, there's a who are you and what are you bringing of yourself, and what role are you? Because being able to incorporate you as an authentic human being and you as in your teacher role, that's challenging. So like, I hear that can get really confusing. But I also think it's really powerful, because that vulnerability is what kids know and they need to see. Like, otherwise, there's an opportunity for a disconnect. And a lot of what we're trying to do with conversations is connect and relate. So what tools, the other thing about power dynamics is people don't want to get in trouble. We don't want to get fired. There's this real life thing called following the rules, and what happens if we don't follow the rules, and what are the rules for? So if the rules, the polite etiquette rules, are to protect me from saying the wrong thing, or because I don't know about you, but I was raised colorblind. I know a lot of people weren't always raised colorblind, but there's a large generation of white people who they're literally, my parents were like, we're all the same and we can love anybody. And they're hippie parents, and I love them so much, because when I did end up falling in love with my husband, who's from Mexico, nobody batted an eye. Like, it was not an issue at all. I don't have that, those family dynamics. But what they didn't teach me was that we're not all treated the same. It was very much like, we're all the same. We don't see color. And that meant that I missed out on many opportunities of noticing it and calling it out, or seeing when things were happening that were not okay. Which means that now I have to unlearn that and relearn how to see it differently. I wasn't raised to see the systems of oppression in action, because we're all freaking out, which is bullshit. We know that. So the power dynamics of not wanting to rock the boat and acknowledging that not everybody is in a position to speak up. I'm not coming here saying everyone should speak their truth, because sometimes it's not safe to do that, or there's a concern. But I think to acknowledge where your privilege exists and what do you have to lose and what do we have to gain. I am more of a risk taker, and I think that acknowledging how that can negatively impact me, but then how it can also positively impact others. And those are conversations that we have in the mirror or in bed at night. Like, those are the conversations where, when we talk about redistribution of power and I'm on a board, and it would be easy for me to just take that president position, to stop and be like, well, wait, let's just pause here. Okay, so I'm going to keep moving on. What tools do I, and again, jump up if you have questions. Oh, wait, I do see one. I told you I wasn't going to look. What are the rules for, what does this even say? Who are the rules for as well? Totally. Oh, that's from you, Muna. Who are the rules for? Yeah. And what I see a lot is that the rules are to protect me. Fair housing rules in real estate, they're to protect white realtors. So, like, let's just call that what it is. And how do we dismantle that? So what tools do I have access to? These are the questions that you're asking and you're talking about when you're in conversations with others. Using conversation tools, Muna did some of them in the beginning. I'm going to go through some of them too. And then, how do I end a conversation? So when a conversation gets heated, when you get emotionally charged, what are your trickster moves to, because you're not necessarily quitting on the conversation, you're being strategic. So sometimes if I'm getting really intense about something, I say, okay, I need this, I feel really strongly about this, and so I just need a couple of minutes, or can we change the subject and can I come back to this later? So it's a lot of people think that if you exit from a conversation that you're quitting, but sometimes it's actually really strategic to take a couple deep breaths or take some moments, and then be able to come back later and have a better conversation. So thinking about ways that you can move through a conversation is really, really helpful. Building relationships on trust and respect. Every single conversation is dependent on what kind of relationship you have with that person, period. So relationships is the most important key. There is no rule book for how to have a super effective conversation unless we know exactly what the kind of relationship that you have with that person. So how much trust is there? How much history is there? And what kind of personality traits are you working with, et cetera. It's not letting me move my thing. There we go. These are some conversation guidelines that Muna went over some of them too, like using I statements, don't speak for another person or for an entire group. Be brief, it's not helpful to lecture. Resist desire to interrupt. There's a difference between talking with someone and talking at someone and interrupting. is not usually helpful, especially if the other person is a slower processor. Be honest and willing to be vulnerable. Vulnerability, I think, is a superpower, especially in conversations of race. And we'll talk about that in a second. Pausing, super helpful, because a lot of people don't pause enough. Try not to take comments personally. I know this is really hard, but it's really, really important, especially if we consider this as doing the work that needs to be done. Listening with curiosity and suspending judgment. Watching for detours, staying on topic, and then expect and accept unfinished business. So another thing that happens is that we like to put things in a box and tie a pretty bow on it. And it's really helpful if we can go into conversations knowing that we're not going to fix it necessarily and that there will be unfinished business. It's not about trying to change everybody's mind, or it's more of an ongoing practice. So I have a lot more about this, and I'm giving you this. There's a free PDF that's on my website, and Moon is going to put it in the links. So you can download this PDF, and it has a lot more information about preparing for challenging conversations, disrupting negative patterns, tips for how to step in, step out, come back, and what to say when, because there's only so much we can do in the time that we have. But you have access to that if you want it. Can we just quickly talk about negative patterns though? So negative patterns are like when people shut down. Like if you can start noticing what your negative patterns are within conversation styles, debating. Some people love to debate. Some people love to get defensive. Okay, nobody loves to get defensive. It's a negative pattern though. And once we notice them, and if we can figure out what ours are, then it's easier for us to shift them. There is really not much that is useful in being defensive. So that's when we get out of judgment and into curiosity, because the minute we get defensive and we're triggered like that, we can get curious. Oh, wow, I just got defensive. And that's sharing a vulnerability that if you can actually model for people, it's a huge win, because you're giving yourself a break. You're acknowledging where you're not showing up in your best, and the world isn't going to end. So like being able to notice when you are defensive is an opportunity for other people to notice it too. These are other tools and resources. Okay, so one of the things that I think is really important is to be practicing these conversations. So there's 7 guided conversations, 7 topics, and then there's prep work. And then there are guided questions offered. So it's a topic, prep work, and then actual questions. It's like 20 minutes maybe of prep work, but it's around the specific topic. So if you're looking to challenge yourself, find 7 friends or teacher colleagues or neighbors or people in your workplace, whatever, and agree to do one of the guided conversations a week for 7 weeks or whatever, once a month for 7 months. But it's an easy way to start the process without having to make it all up on your own. And a lot of people just need to practice it. So one of the things that we're going to do if we were going to have a little bit more time was to do some breakout sessions so that you can use some of the tools to actually engage. And maybe we can do some of that with the questions when people come up if they want to do some role playing. But then it's not necessarily looking for ways to find spaces that are comfortable for these conversations, because what you're doing is you're agreeing to be in conversation with someone and you are looking to be challenged, right? And you're looking to be held accountable. So it's one of my favorite things around humility is the definition for me is the absence of ego, righteousness, arrogance, and the need for right, wrong. If I am being that person, sometimes I come off as pretty righteous. And that's not helpful if I'm trying to engage people in a conversation that they might be more uncomfortable with. So again, when we talk about the spectrum of where people are at on their racial justice journey, if there are times if I'm a little bit tired and crabby, where someone might want to have a conversation around all lives matter. And I can't even. And that's on me to do that work, to drop the ego and the righteousness and the arrogance and sit with that person and bring them in, because people can change, and they can't change when we're shaming them, and they can't change when we're telling them that they're wrong and that we're right. So a lot of times we're looking for what kinds of conversations are we having and where. So this is just to give you a little bit of perspective so that you can make your own decisions and figure out where you want to be doing the work and where you feel like your growth edges, or where you're going to be able to make a lot more impact. So the inner and interpersonal work is obviously super important, because how do you expect to have conversations out in the world if you're not even having them at your dinner table? Also, is it effective to be having conversations with family members? Or is it going to cause more, like, where that's your discernment work around effectiveness. Now, some people might say, yes, that's the work that we need to be doing. We need to be having these conversations with everybody. Okay, maybe, but I'm going to call bullshit on that too, because maybe not. Because if your uncle, I'm sorry that Uncle Frank is coming up to mind a lot. I actually don't have an Uncle Frank, but like if anybody does, but that's my example right now. If Uncle Frank is so set in his ways and it just triggers me all of the time and makes everybody else uncomfortable, I don't know if that's really where my impact can make a difference. If I want to go into it and practice having challenging conversations, because that's going to be helpful for me, great. But if it might actually be helpful for me to be having more challenging conversations with the people that I work with, then that's where I want to be discerning. Mona, did you have anything?
Yes. Somebody asked, how or who do we invite into these guided conversations?
Okay. Who asked that? Are you willing to talk to me?
They're actually on the YouTube live stream, so that they're not on the Zoom call, so they can't respond back.
Okay, no worries. Who do you want to be in conversation with? So I look for people, like I would maybe have it with, the first time that I started this was because I wanted to have more conversations with my teenager. So the first one that I created was 7 conversation challenges for my teenager, because I felt like we weren't having enough conversations around race in my house. So it could be with your spouse, it could be with us. You don't have to do 7 people. That was just the fun little 7 conversations, 7 people, 7 weeks. But you can do it. You can just do it with one person. Some people wanted to read it and then not tell the other person that they were trying to engage in the conversation and just go out and find people and randomly at like dinner parties, which we can't have anymore. So there's that limited situation, is to try and engage. But you could also do it with a partner. And that could be your accountability partner. It could be a neighbor. I hope that's helpful. Or if you're a teacher, have it with another teacher. So the inner and interpersonal work, learning, teaching historical context. What are you learning? What are you learning about? If you're in conversations with people, is it to learn, is it to teach, or is it to have a meaningful interaction? And how are we using historical context within our conversations? So I think historical context is a fascinating way to take the pressure off opinions and to just create space for a conversation about what actually has happened, or currently what's happened. So where that also could come into play, I'm a big believer that there should be more white privilege taught in schools, because I don't think enough white people understand their white privilege, and there's a lot of othering. So my quick personal story is that I got my undergrad degree in Spanish, and I fell in love with being able to communicate with people in a different language, and I studied other cultures. And I had zero concept really of my own culture. I know that's not everybody's story, because some people are really connected to their culture. I was connected to my Jewish culture, but not to my Irish English culture at all, or heritage at all. So when I actually started understanding whiteness and white privilege and seeing myself as white, it was scary and hard for me to talk about it. But the more I talk about it and the more I see it everywhere I go, and the more I'm more comfortable talking about it. And I think it's important for especially children growing up white to be able to notice it in a way that they could potentially change situations, because we can't change what we can't see. So how can we be vulnerable around our whiteness and even say things like, oh my gosh, there's this really amazing article by Tama Akun, I think is their name, and it's about the white supremacy culture. I will put it in the chat in a little bit. And it has a number of issues of how the white supremacy culture is showing up. And so fixing it and perfectionism and a sense of urgency. So as I started studying those, I could notice it in myself and I could call myself out. And I think that might be an important habit that we can get into. Challenging systems of oppression. So that's, again, where are you having conversations? Is it at a district level? How comfortable are you, and what kind of conversations are needed and necessary? Does anyone have a specific question about this, about where specifically you can show up in the work? Does anyone in the Zoom want to come off mute? Oh, wait, let me see this. How do you call others out in the classroom? It may be someone you don't know very well. I'm all about grace and using my own self. So I don't know what the specific situation is, but Jude, do you want to bring that question out? Okay, you don't have to. I think that no specifics. Okay. Honestly, being able to not know the answers is something that I don't think a lot of teachers like to. I mean, aren't we taught to know all of the answers? And aren't we the ones that people should come to when we don't have the answer, or when they don't have the answers? So for us to be with children and with teenagers and not understand completely our own deficits around, because we didn't get the education. A lot of us really didn't get the education. So we're learning it right now. So what does it look like to learn with your students? I mean, that would be a question I would have. And are you okay with that? And if you're not okay with that, why? Because I think students have a lot to teach us. And I actually think that they respect us not knowing the answer. That's just my opinion. So some of the things we talked about: why it's important, why are we doing this? Are we doing it to protect ourselves? Are we doing it because we should? Are we doing it because we're absolutely gutted that Black people continue to get murdered? That the disparities are so huge? I mean, like, you can just close your eyes and you can think of numerous things where it's like, this is not right, this is not okay. So why are we doing this? What stops us from doing the work? You know what stops you. If you actually get quiet and journal about it and think about it, you know what stops you. And if you actually look at it as a way of a system of oppression that doesn't want you to, then it's on us to rebel against that and to reject it and to dismantle it from within us. How do we describe, good way to describe whiteness and white privilege without triggering people? That's going to be the relationship that you have with that person. If somebody is triggered, then if you're engaged in a conversation and you can tell they're being triggered, you just stop and you say, hey, is this triggering you? The word triggered might not even be the right word, but like, is this not resonating with you? Because this is my experience. So the way I engage in conversations is, this is my experience. When I realized how white I was and I was ashamed of my own whiteness, I was like, that's messed up. Like, I obviously have some work to do if I'm like, feel guilty about the privileges that are given to me literally because I was born with the skin color. Like, that is like not, I teach in a predominantly white district, and even the mention of either of these terms could be considered. Okay, so then do your 7 conversation topics. Do that. Find some people who are willing to have the conversations with you, even though it's considered controversial. And because within those 7, like the first 2 or 3 or 4, I think, are literally around race as a social construct. So it's not like how I feel about being white. It's literally how whiteness was created. So that's where getting into the historical context is really helpful. Primary and elementary school students and first graders, nope, no clue. I'm just kidding. I mean, I don't really know, except I do know that they know and they see it and they are aware of it. So getting in their level and being able to be honest about it. Yeah, and there's probably a ton of books. But there's your thing right there. You go find some other teachers who work with primary and elementary school students and first graders and connect with Nicole. So Tara and Nicole, now you can like private chat yourselves and share phone numbers. But reach out to people so that you can find some good resources. And PBS has a lot of resources. So understanding what the work is, I think is really important because it's huge to not take it personally. If you want to not if you want, you will feel it personally. I like flush up when I say something wrong. Like I sweat, I like feel like someone kicked me in the stomach. Like I physically feel when I am possibly screwing something up, and that means that I'm doing the work, right? So I'm not saying it's not going to get uncomfortable. I'm saying it's worth it to get uncomfortable, and that means I am practicing it. So the thing that we have to remember is that we're not trying to not cause harm. We're trying to cause less harm, because our silence is causing more harm than what our perceived mistakes will be. If we can, and I'm going to do another webinar with my friend Nikita about making mistakes and repair and recovery and reconciliation. Because when we can plan for what's going to happen when we make a mistake, then we know that the world isn't going to end, and that we have some tools in our pocket on how to recover and how to make. Okay, that's going to be a whole nother thing, but that's really important because people are scared of that. So it's about causing less harm, and then learning about the process. Okay, hold on.
There are questions that kind of builds off of the last one. And they asked, how do you have these conversations with teenage students? And I know that what inspired you to create that 7-question guide was your own teenagers. How do you have these conversations with teenage students who have parents who are opposed to acknowledging racism and white privilege?
So the parents aren't in the classroom. So if the students, I think it's crucial that teachers are talking about what's happening within the subject that they're teaching and the historical context of racism within whatever subject, and acknowledging white supremacy and whiteness. So I think it's more along the lines of facilitating. Like, what do you all want to talk about? Because I'm pretty sure the teenagers want to talk about it, but they don't feel like they can talk about it. It depends on I guess it sounds like the fear is with the parents. So then that would mean, okay, where do I need to shift the conversation and find a parent who's willing to create some conversations with other parents, or talk to the district and be like, this is important. This is what we're talking about. I need you to back me up. So if a parent's pissed off that I'm talking about something that literally is a thing, I don't know. Do parents say that they can and can't teach certain things? If the someone think.
I just meant because I think that a lot of times parents kids really identify with the mindsets of their parents, and maybe that's what they're brought up hearing. Like maybe that conversation is very different in the home than it should be. And that's where I feel like it can be kind of hard talking about that in the classroom when kids already have this really preconceived like idea or, you know, concept of the way things are when it's not reality. And I feel like that, I don't know, can be kind of hard to talk about.
Yeah, a lot of parents like to hold on to the whole colorblind concept theory when colorblind doesn't allow for uniqueness. And I think that's the issue with a lot of parents is, you know, I'm colorblind. My mother said it all the time until I finally, you know, did my own research behind it. And colorblind doesn't give anybody any flavor. Like we're all different in our own way. No, you know, but that's just how I feel about it. The parents are holding on to, you know, archaic ideology where colorblind is what it should be when it should not. That's just how I feel about it. And that's where the disconnect comes from with the parent and the student, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah, 100%. And even having that conversation with the students, like, you know, this might be different than what you're hearing, but there's a lot, the power of illusion, race is a construct. I think that's where there can be so much. PBS did that, Muna, the power of illusion. My gosh, that is mind blowing, that whole website and all of the videos. So one of the issues is that some students might not want to have the conversation. And so where can you create space for the kids that do want to have the conversation to support them because they're starting to see it, right? So they see it and then they're starting to see their friends. And so as a supportive role model, like here, this is what I'm dealing with as a teacher. This is what I'm dealing with my own understanding of race and racism, because we can't ignore it. And where are you all at? Not to get into an argument, but to acknowledge where people are and to try and find the humanity of within. Like, we're all humans, right? Can we always come back to that one place where we're all humans and we experience things differently because of the social constructs? There are so many examples. Also that there is no easy answer for it, right? So like there are going to be conversations where you're just going to be like, this isn't going anywhere. I can't reach this student. And then the question is that a white saviorism where you feel like it's on you to save all the white people? And so to be able to check yourself at the same time you're in these situations of I know a lot of people think of white saviorism as white people saving Black and brown communities or people, but there are also white saviorism is also in us within just the need to save others. So being able to check that within yourself, I think is really important. We're into question time. Oh wait, I wanted to talk about this upcoming workshop. So Ananda Murilli and I are doing a workshop on August 15th. It's called Untold Stories about the good schools and neighborhoods. Me coming from the real estate, Ananda's in the education world. She works at DPI and she's on the board of education at Madison Metropolitan School District. And so this is something that you all are invited to if you want to. There's a blog post, or there's a link to it that Muna's gonna share that you can register for that. So putting the work on your calendar in terms of practicing the conversations, I think honestly with your students, you're gonna have to find your own comfort level with that within the age group that you're working in, within the subject that you're in, within the dynamics. I know some people are in very diverse schools. Some people are not in diverse in terms of race and ethnicity. So that's where I'm going to ask you to do the discernment work too, and to work on all of those different layers. And then how can you best serve? If you are a person who doesn't have a lot of conversations about race because you weren't raised with it, because you didn't grow up with it, then you need to put it on your calendar. And you can use that 7-person conversation challenge to do it. You need to know what resources you have and what is in your toolbox. And having an accountability partner is really, really helpful. So if there's someone, whether they're in this session or whether they're at your school or a really good friend or a family member that cares as much as you do about dismantling racism, then make that person, like, have an agreement with that person. I'm going to have a difficult conversation at some point and I'm going to call you crying. You know, like, this is the thing where if we want to really figure out as white people where we're causing harm, it's not knowing where to go with our shit. So like, if I'm having, like, I screw up, I don't call my Black and brown friends. Like, I will have conversations with them because I'm in relationship with them. And there are some people that, you know, like, that is, but I'm not going to, like, I'm going to be very conscientious about where I am sharing my feelings around how hard it is. So that is me wrapping it all up for you and then being available for a couple more minutes. I'm actually going to linger on here until about 4:40. So I know that Muna is going to shut it down at 4:30 maybe, but we can just hang out for people who have questions.
I'll hang out here too. And we'll see if anyone has questions. For those of you who have to get going, thank you so much for attending. This is kind of inspiring me, Sara, to maybe have some sort of follow-up, maybe a few weeks from now, and say, hey, did you have these conversations? Do you want to talk about it and share your experiences? So that might be something that happens. For all of you who came, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for being so engaged. There were so many resources linked here in the chat, and you will all be receiving those in a post-event email. So if you registered, you'll be getting a post-event email with a recording of this, access to the live stream, a certificate of attendance, and all of these great resources. But for those of you who want to stick around and ask Sara some more questions, please do.
I have a question, and I'm not sure about how to phrase it.